In 1974, a Texas mechanic named Earl kept a customer's Chevy running past 300,000 miles, using tricks the dealership swore would destroy it. Everyone voided the warranty. Today, most people think old cars just lasted longer. The truth is stranger. Number 14 on this list was banned outright by the EPA. Number 3 was so simple that parts stores buried it to keep selling you replacements. These 25 tricks were forbidden, frowned on, or flat out illegal, and they kept engines alive for decades. Hit subscribe. Let's count down. Number 25. Cardboard in front of the radiator. When the temperature dropped below freezing, old-timers slid a flat piece of cardboard between the grill and the radiator. It looked like a joke. It worked like engineering. In winter, an engine that never reaches full operating temperature runs rich, washes oil off the cylinder walls, and builds sludge that eats it alive from the inside. That cardboard blocked just enough cold air so the engine warmed up fast and stayed there. A mechanic would cut it to fit, leave a gap at the bottom, and pull it out come spring. It cost nothing. A cereal box was enough. Fleet drivers and farmers swore by it because a cold-running engine in January was a dead engine by March. Modern cars have electric fans and thermostats that handle this automatically, but plenty of truckers still keep a winter front in the cab. The old boys just used the box the parts came in. Number 24. The nylon stocking fan belt. Your fan belt snaps 40 miles from the nearest town. In 1965, that was not a tow truck problem. It was a glove box problem. The mechanic, or the driver's wife, pulled off a nylon stocking, looped it around the pulleys, and tied it tight with a square knot. Nylon has just enough grip and stretch to turn the water pump and the generator long enough to limp home. It would not last forever. It would last the 40 miles that mattered. Truck drivers carried a spare pair for exactly this reason. No explanation offered. The trick worked because a fan belt does not need to be strong so much as continuous, and a doubled-over stocking held tension without shredding for an hour or two. Try that with a modern serpentine belt spinning 7 accessories and you will get smoke. But on a simple V-belt setup, it saved thousands of stranded drivers who never called anyone at all. Number 23. Tapping the starter with a hammer. The car would not start. Not a click, not a crank, just a dead thud when you turned the key. A young driver panics. An old mechanic reaches for a hammer. He would crawl under the car, find the starter motor, and give it 3 or 4 sharp raps with the handle. Then the car fired right up. This was not superstition. The starter has copper contacts and brushes inside that wear down and develop dead spots. When the armature stops on one of those spots, no current flows. A solid whack jars the brushes past the dead patch and completes the circuit. It bought you 1 more start, sometimes 100 more. Cab drivers kept a hammer under the seat for the specific purpose. The trick told you the starter was dying, but it also meant you were never truly stranded. You just had to know where to hit it and how hard. Number 22. Coca-Cola on corroded battery terminals. Pop the hood on a 1958 sedan, and the battery posts were crusted with white and blue corrosion, thick as a barnacle. That fuzzy buildup blocks current and leaves you cranking a dead-feeling battery that is actually fine. The fix sat in the cooler behind the shop. A mechanic would pour a bottle of Coca-Cola straight over the terminals and watch it foam. The phosphoric and carbonic acid in the soda ate through the corrosion in about a minute. A wire brush finished the job, then a wipe down and a smear of grease to keep it from coming back. A 10-cent bottle of Coke did what a can of battery cleaner does today for $6. It worked on any acidic crust, rusted bolts, mineral buildup, and chrome. The old men were not being clever. They just knew what was in the bottle and used it where it did the most good. Number 21. Black pepper in the radiator. A cooling system springs a pinhole leak, coolant drips onto the driveway, and the engine starts creeping toward the red. Before commercial stop leak came in a can, the mechanic reached for the spice rack. A tablespoon of ground black pepper poured into the radiator would circulate through the system, and the tiny particles wedged into the pinhole swelling slightly as they got wet until the leak sealed itself. Some men used raw egg white, which cooked and clotted the moment it hit a hot leak, plugging it like a scab. It was crude, it was temporary, and every mechanic knew it. But it turned a roadside disaster into a slow drive to the shop. A leak that would have cracked a head from overheating got you home instead. The chemistry was real. You were creating a filter that clogged itself exactly where it needed to. Just never open that radiator cap on a hot engine. Number 20. A bar of soap on a leak. A rock punches a weep in the gas tank or a hairline crack opens in the oil pan, and fuel or oil is dripping onto the road. The mechanic pulled a bar of hard soap, ivory, lava, whatever was at the sink, and rubbed it hard across the leak until the wax and tallow packed into the crack and sealed it. Gasoline and oil do not dissolve dry hardened soap quickly, so the plug held for hours, sometimes days. On a cracked tank, it was the difference between making it to a welder and standing on the shoulder watching your fuel puddle. Men who worked gravel roads kept a bar in the toolbox next to the wrenches. It was never a permanent fix, and any honest mechanic told you so. But permanent was not the point. The point was getting the car off the highway and into a bay under its own power. Soap did that for a nickel. Number 19. Marvel mystery oil in everything. There was a red can in every serious mechanic's cabinet, and half his customers had no idea what was in it. Marvel mystery oil showed up in 1923, and old-timers poured it into the crankcase, the gas tank, and even the transmission. A few ounces in the oil kept sludge from forming and freed up sticky lifters that ticked on cold mornings. A splash in the gas tank cleaned the carburetor jets and lubricated the upper cylinders. It thinned just enough to creep into places thicker oil could not reach. Skeptics called it snake oil. The men who ran engines 200,000 miles called it insurance. A quart cost about $1 in the 1960s and lasted a year. The manufacturers hated it because a clean, freely running engine did not come back for repairs. That red can was one of a dozen additives the pros trusted and the showroom pretended did not exist. First pattern break. Here is where the real story starts. None of these tricks were secret because they were dangerous. They were secret because they were profitable to forget. In 1924, the biggest car makers in America sat in a room in Geneva and agreed to build products that wore out on schedule. They called it planned obsolescence, and it started with light bulbs, but it did not stay there. A car that ran forever was a car nobody replaced. So the knowledge that kept engines alive, the additives, the adjustments, the roadside saves, slowly got pushed out of the manuals and into the heads of old men who learned it in the army or from their fathers. The dealership did not teach you to tap your own starter. It taught you to make an appointment. Every trick on this list survived because somebody refused to throw a car away when a wrench and 10 minutes would fix it. That refusal was the whole philosophy. The rest is just technique. Number 18. Transmission fluid in the crankcase. This one made dealership mechanics wince, and the old-timers did it anyway. Before an oil change, they would drain a quart of engine oil and pour in a quart of automatic transmission fluid, then idle the engine for 10 minutes, never drive it, before dumping the whole mess out. A TF is loaded with detergents and solvents designed to keep a transmission spotless. Run it briefly in a sludged-up engine, and it scrubs the varnish and gunk off the internals and suspends it so it drains out with the old oil. Fresh oil then went into a genuinely clean engine. Do it too long or drive on it, and the thin fluid starves the bearings, which is exactly why the warranty forbade it. But done right, a 5-minute idle flush brought a neglected engine back from the edge. The trick lived on hand-scrawled index cards and glove boxes, passed between men who knew engines die from the inside out. Number 17. Setting the points with a matchbook. Before electronic ignition, every engine ran on breaker points, a tiny mechanical switch that opened and closed thousands of times a minute to fire the spark plugs. The gap between those points had to be exact, measured in thousandths of an inch. A mechanic was supposed to carry a feeler gauge. Out on the road with a stalled car, he carried a matchbook. The cover of a paper matchbook is almost exactly the right thickness to gap a set of points in a pinch. He would slide it between the contacts, adjust until it just dragged, tighten the screw, and the car came back to life. He would also drag the striker strip or a nail file across pitted, burned points to clean them enough to conduct again. Both were roadside miracles that got a dead car running with nothing but what was in his pocket. It worked because the tolerance was generous enough to forgive a man who knew what he was doing. Number 16. Decarbonizing with water down the carburetor. This one looked like sabotage and worked like magic. When an old engine got choked with carbon deposits on the pistons and valves, pinging, running hot, losing power, the mechanic would rev it up to a fast idle and slowly dribble a steady stream of plain water down the carburetor throat. Not a splash, which would hydrolock and bend a rod. A thin trickle. The water flashed instantly to steam in the combustion chamber, and that steam blasted the hard carbon off the pistons and valve faces, blowing it out the tailpipe in a cloud of black smoke. The engine would stumble and cough and then smooth out, running noticeably better. Old-timers called it steam cleaning from the inside. It terrified anyone who did not understand it, which is exactly why it stayed a shop secret. Done with a heavy hand, it destroyed the engine. Done right, it decarbonized a motor for the price of a cup of water. Number 15. Gapping the plugs wide. The manual gave you a spark plug gap and told you to respect it. Old-timers treated it as a suggestion. On a worn engine or a cold-natured one, a mechanic would open the gap a few thousandths past factory specification, forcing a fatter, hotter spark across the plug. That bigger spark lit the fuel mixture more completely, which meant easier starts on frigid mornings, a smoother idle, and better burn on a tired engine that was no longer sealing its cylinders like new. The catch was that a wider gap demands more voltage, so you had to have a strong coil and good wires, or you would get a misfire. Done to a healthy ignition system, it woke an engine up. Racers pushed it further. The men who drove a car until the odometer rolled over twice knew that the factory number was set for a brand new engine, and their engines had not been new since Eisenhower. So they adjusted. Number 14. Pulling the thermostat. Here is one that got men banned from more than a few repair shops. When an engine kept overheating and the mechanic did not have time or money to chase the real cause, he would simply yank the thermostat out and drop the housing back on empty, or replace it with a washer drilled through the center. With no thermostat, coolant flowed freely all the time, and the engine ran cooler in the short term. On a hot summer haul or a truck pulling a heavy load, it stopped the boilovers that stranded you on the shoulder. The problem was that an engine that never reaches proper temperature runs rich, wears faster, and pollutes, which is why it eventually became an emissions violation to run without one. But in the desert in August, with a load to deliver and a boiling radiator, a lot of old drivers pulled that thermostat and never looked back. It was a bandage, and they knew it. Number 13. Tuning by vacuum gauge. Long before a scan tool plugged into a port under the dash, the smartest mechanics diagnosed an entire engine with a single $2 vacuum gauge. They hooked it to a vacuum port on the intake and watched the needle. A steady high reading meant a healthy engine. A needle that flicked or dropped told a trained eye exactly what was wrong. A burned valve, a leaking gasket, worn rings, a vacuum leak, bad timing. Each fault had its own signature wiggle. Then they would adjust the carburetor idle mixture screws while watching the gauge, tuning for the highest, steadiest vacuum, which meant the engine was running at peak efficiency. No guessing, no computer. A man who could read a vacuum gauge could tell you the health of an engine he had never heard run before and set it perfectly in 5 minutes. The tool still costs almost nothing. The skill to read it nearly disappeared when the electronics took over. Number 12. The Italian tune-up. Some cars died from being driven too gently. An engine that only ever idled through traffic and short trips built up carbon on the valves and clogged its own exhaust until it ran sluggish and dirty. The old mechanic's prescription was not a part, it was a road. He would take the car out, drop it into a lower gear, and run it hard up near the red line for several minutes, flogging it, in the old phrase, to build the heat and airflow that burns accumulated carbon right out of the system. The exhaust would blow black, then clear, and the engine came back noticeably livelier. Italian sports car mechanics were famous for it, hence the name, but every good wrench in America knew the cure. It cost nothing and fixed what no additive could. Modern drivers baby their engines and wonder why they gum up. The old men understood that a machine built to run hard sometimes needs to be run hard to stay alive. Second pattern break. Notice what all of these have in common. Every one of them required a human being who understood the machine. That is exactly what got engineered out of the modern car. Today's vehicles are sealed. The transmissions have no dipstick. The joints are lubricated for life, which is a marketing way of saying you cannot grease them and they will fail right after the warranty ends. The engine is a black box that talks to a computer and tells you nothing you can act on with a wrench. This was not an accident. A car you can fix in your driveway is a car that does not generate service revenue. So the industry sealed everything, buried the adjustments, and replaced the vacuum gauge with a diagnostic port that only the dealer's software can fully read. The old-timers were not smarter than modern engineers. They were just allowed to touch their machines. Every trick on this list is really a story about a time when the driver, not the manufacturer, was in charge of how long a car lived. Number 11. Packing the wheel bearings by hand. There was a ritual that separated the men who kept cars forever from the men who bought new ones. Every so often, an old mechanic pulled the front wheels, popped out the bearings, cleaned every trace of old grease off, and repacked them by hand. He would put a glob of fresh wheel bearing grease in his palm and drag the bearing through it, edge first, again and again, forcing grease into every roller until it was completely full. Do it wrong, and a dry bearing seized at highway speed and locked a wheel. Do it right, and those bearings lasted the life of the car. It was slow, filthy work, and no one enjoyed it. But a hand-packed bearing did not fail, and a failed front bearing could kill you. Today's sealed hub assemblies get thrown away and replaced as whole units for hundreds of dollars. The old man's hands, a can of grease, and 20 minutes did the same job for the cost of the grease. Number 10. Thicker oil to quiet a knock. When a high-mileage engine developed a knock or a ticking lifter, the honest fix was an expensive rebuild. The old mechanic had a cheaper answer that got you years. He stepped up to a heavier weight of oil. An engine with worn bearings has grown loose internally, and thin oil slips through those enlarged gaps and lets the metal knock. A thicker oil fills the clearances, cushions the parts, and quiets the noise, restoring the oil pressure a tired engine had lost. On an old motor in the summer heat, a jump from a thin oil to a heavy one could silence a knock that had the owner shopping for a new car. Purists sneered because it masked a symptom instead of curing the disease. But the men who did it were not fools. They knew the engine was worn. They just also knew a worn engine could run another 80,000 miles if you stopped fighting its clearances and started working with them. Number 9. Advancing the timing. The factory set your ignition timing conservatively, retarded a few degrees from where the engine actually made its best power, to survive cheap gas and protect the warranty. Old-timers knew it, and with a timing light in one hand, they would twist the distributor to advance the spark a few degrees past the book number. The engine woke up. Crisper throttle, more pep, better fuel economy. It fired the mixture a hair earlier, so the burn pushed the piston at exactly the right moment instead of a beat too late. The risk was detonation, that sharp pinging under load that hammers a piston to death if you ignore it, so a good mechanic advanced it just until it pinged, then backed off a touch. Done with an ear and a light, it gave an old engine a second youth. The manufacturers left that power on the table on purpose. The men in the alley garages went and took it back. Number 8. Disconnecting the EGR valve. Now we get into the truly forbidden. The EGR valve routes exhaust gas back into the intake to lower combustion temperatures and cut emissions. It also, on a lot of older systems, made the engine run rougher, ping under load, and clog itself with carbon until it stuck open and stalled the car. So old mechanics quietly unplugged it or blocked it off with a plate. The engine ran smoother and hotter and pinged less. The trade was more nitrogen oxide pollution out the tailpipe, which is precisely why tampering with it is illegal under federal emissions law. Nobody advertised doing it. But in an era when the early emissions equipment was crude and half-broken, plenty of driveway mechanics decided a car that ran was better than a car that stalled at every light, and they made the swap. It kept a lot of frustrated owners from junking otherwise good cars. It also broke the law, and everyone involved knew it. Number 7. Gutting the catalytic converter. Here is the one that got shops raided. The catalytic converter cleans the exhaust, but the old ones clogged, choked the engine, and killed power, and a replacement was one of the most expensive parts on the car. So some old-school mechanics took a chisel or a length of pipe and knocked the guts out of the converter, leaving a hollow shell, or replaced it with a straight pipe entirely. The engine breathed freely again, made more power, and ran cooler. It also dumped raw pollutants into the air, which is why gutting a converter is a federal crime with real fines attached, then and now. This was never a fix an honest shop bragged about. It was a back-alley job done cash in hand for a customer who could not afford the real part and needed the car to pass down the road. It kept old cars running and dirty. Of everything on this list, it is the one the law comes down on hardest, and for a reason. Third pattern break. Let's be honest about what just happened. The last 3 tricks were not clever workarounds. They were emissions crimes, and they poisoned the air a little more with every mile. That is the uncomfortable part of this history. A lot of what kept cars running forever also kept them running dirty, back when nobody counted the cost. The old-timers were not villains. The early emissions gear really was crude and unreliable, and a working man with a broken car and no money makes the choice in front of him. But the reason those parts exist is real, and the reason tampering is illegal is real too. So take the rest of this list for what it is. The ingenuity is genuine, the resourcefulness is worth remembering, and a few of these belong in a museum, not your garage. The mechanics who did them were solving a problem the world had not fully figured out yet. We have better answers now. We also lost some good ones. Number 6. Rebuilding the carburetor instead of replacing it. When a carburetor started flooding, stalling, or running rough, the parts counter wanted to sell you a whole new unit for serious money. The old mechanic bought a rebuild kit for a few dollars. He would pull the carburetor apart on the bench, lay every screw and spring out in order, soak the metal body in cleaner until the varnish dissolved, blow out every tiny passage with compressed air, and reassemble it with fresh gaskets, a new float needle, and clean jets. It came back running like new for the price of a nice lunch. A carburetor is just a precisely drilled hunk of metal. Nothing in it truly wears out that a cleaning and a few new parts cannot cure. The skill was in the patience and knowing where every piece went. That knowledge kept cars on the road for a fraction of the cost, which is exactly why the industry was happy to see rebuilding replaced by the reman and replace world we live in now. Number 5. Rust-proofing the frame with used motor oil. Rust killed more old cars than any engine failure ever did. The frame rotted from the inside out, especially anywhere they salted the winter roads. So the old-timers fought it with the cheapest weapon they had, their own drain oil. Instead of tossing the used motor oil from an oil change, they thinned it a little and sprayed or brushed it into the rocker panels, frame rails, and every hidden cavity where water pooled. The oil crept into the seams, coated the bare metal, and displaced moisture so rust could not get a foothold. A car treated this way every fall could outlast 3 untreated ones. The downside is obvious and serious. Spraying waste oil under a car drips onto the ground and washes into the soil, which is why it is now an environmental no-go. But before anyone thought about that, a gallon of free used oil saved a lot of frames from rotting out from under otherwise perfect cars. Number 4. Sea foam through the vacuum line. Old mechanics had a way of cleaning an engine's guts without taking anything apart, and it looked alarming. With the engine warmed up and idling, they would slowly feed a cleaning solvent, the old standby that came in a can, directly into a vacuum line so it got sucked into the intake and drawn across the valves and combustion chambers. The engine drank it in, stumbled, and the solvent dissolved the carbon and gum baked onto the intake valves and piston tops. Then they would shut it off, let it soak for a few minutes, and restart it, revving it out in a thick fog of white smoke that cleared the neighborhood. The engine came back smoother, quieter, with cleaner idle and better throttle. It was a chemical decarbonize for the price of a can, done in a parking lot with a warm engine and a steady hand. Feed it too fast and you hydrolock the motor, so the old men fed it slow. Number 3. Cleaning and regapping dead spark plugs. Here is the simple one the parts stores would rather you forget. A fouled spark plug, black, oil-crusted, misfiring, did not go in the trash. The old mechanic pulled it, cleaned it, and put it right back in. He would wire brush the electrode, scrape the carbon out from around the tip, sometimes sandblast it in a little bench tool built for exactly that, then reset the gap with a feeler gauge and reinstall it. A plug that had you convinced the engine was dying came back firing clean, and that set of plugs went another 20,000 miles. A spark plug is a rugged little thing. Most of the time it is not worn out, just dirty. But a cleaned plug is a plug you did not buy. Multiply that across every car in town, and you understand why nobody at the counter ever suggested it. The trick cost nothing but 10 minutes and a wire brush, and it kept ignition systems alive for years. Number 2. Bump starting a dead car. A dead battery in a parking lot with no jumper cables was not a tow truck call. It was a running start. If the car had a manual transmission, the old-timer put the key on, pushed in the clutch, dropped it into second gear, and either coasted it down a hill or got 2 people to push it up to a walking pace. Then he popped the clutch. The turning wheels spun the engine through the transmission, the engine caught and fired, and the car roared to life without a working starter or a charged battery in sight. Farmers did it on flat fields. Kids did it in high school lots. It saved a dead battery car every single time, as long as you had a slope or a shove and a stick shift. Automatics could not do it, which is one more reason the old manual transmission crowd never felt truly stranded. All it took was momentum and knowing the exact moment to let the clutch out. Number 1. The grease gun and the forgotten fittings. The single trick that kept old cars running forever was not clever at all. It was a ritual most people have never heard of. Old cars were built with grease fittings, little nipples called zerks, on every joint in the steering and suspension. Tie rods, ball joints, U-joints, kingpins, every pivot that took a load. And every oil change, the mechanic went around with a grease gun and pumped fresh grease into every one of them, forcing the old dirty grease out and packing the joint full. A car greased on schedule had a front end that never wore out. The steering stayed tight for 250,000 miles. Then the manufacturers replaced those fittings with sealed, lubricated-for-life joints, which sounds generous until you learn that life means until the warranty ends and the joint dries out and fails, and now the whole part gets replaced for hundreds of dollars. The old man with a grease gun and $1's worth of grease was doing the most important maintenance on the car, and the industry engineered away his ability to do it. That grease gun was the whole secret. Not a magic additive, not a back alley cheat. Just a man who took 10 minutes to force fresh grease into every joint and refused to let a good car wear out. Here is my challenge. Try one of these this week. Just one. Pour the Coke on your corroded terminals. Read a vacuum gauge. Clean a fouled plug instead of tossing it. Then come back and tell me if the old men were just being cheap, or if they knew something we got talked out of. Drop the one you're going to try in the comments. I want to know if the grease gun gets more love than the Italian tune-up. Because these weren't just tricks. They were proof that a car was something you kept, not something you replaced.